I'm going to start off with something kind of simple question. How many of you in this room were born? Some of you were a little unsure. How many were hatched? You were all born? Now I'm going to ask you to do something else, not too tough. Everyone just take a deep breath, just a deep breath. Ready? Okay. That's how close some of you, definitely how close I was, a breath away from actually not being born. See, I'm that 1%. You hear that 1% a lot of times. I'm actually the 1%. The 1% that's used to justify 100% of abortion. My birth mom was raped, experienced the horror of rape, and yet courageously chose life. For me, she gave me the gift of adoption. She enabled me to not only be able to love others, but to be loved. That's a lot of courage. And so people will often say, and even pro-lifers have a hard time with those conceived in rape. There are labels that we give to people like me. Rape baby, I've heard all of them. Product of rape, but I'm not a product. I'm a human being. There are other pejoratives that are thrown out there all the time too, like a rapist child. I'm definitely not the rapist child. I was her child, and definitely always a child of God. See, this is what happens, because we don't do this in other situations. You don't call somebody, let's say, whose father's an alcoholic. You don't say the alcoholic's child. You don't say the drug dealer's child. See, what happens is when we do things like that, giving labels to certain human beings because of circumstances they couldn't control whatsoever, is we diminish humanity. And so in cases of rape, that 1% of all U.S. abortions, even pro-lifers can tend to dehumanize people like me conceived in such a horrific act of violence. And some people will wonder, well, what are those numbers? Because we hear that all the time. Anytime someone tries to justify abortion, you will inevitably get to, but what about rape? We should be able to answer it. Because what I've found in traveling across the country, and I tell you, I meet some of the most amazing people, get to hear the most amazing stories, and I meet a lot of rape survivors. And there's one common thread through their stories that is just the same. And that common thread is that the child is the only redemptive thing in such a horrific situation. You think, how can that situation be redemptive? How can that be redeemed? And yet, not only those who've chose to parent or those who've chosen to place their children for adoption, but those who chose abortion, it's the same thing. The child is or would have been the only thing that's redemptive. And so we hear these cases of rape, we hear being called the heart cases. I like to call them the heart cases. Because what you don't hear in mainstream media are the stories of those conceived in rape, the story of rape survivors who were stronger than their circumstances. But here I stand, someone, flesh and blood, happily married man with, as I mentioned, 4 amazing kiddos who remind me daily of the courage of my birth mom. They remind me of the sacrifice, the self-sacrifice of my parents. Now, I grew up in a tiny little family of 15. Some of you might have some large families, so that might be small compared to yours, I'm not sure. But I have 6 brothers and 6 sisters. We grew up in a house with 1.5 bathrooms. Can you just let that sink in for just a minute? 6 sisters. Sometimes they need like 1 bathroom per. Anyway, so growing up in a farm, on a farm with this family, this Bomberger family, 13 kids. It was crazy. Some people wonder, well, what possessed your parents to adopt 10? Because they had 3 homemade, and then they adopted all the rest of us. What possessed them to adopt 10? Well, it's amazing what happens in life. There are times in our lives when there's brokenness. And we have the ability to make choices throughout our lives. Do we continue in that vein of brokenness? Or do we make decisions to rise out of that? And with my mom, who had an alcoholic father who separated when she was 5, she experienced a lot of brokenness growing up. And when she was placed in a children's home for a short period of time, for about a year, she made a promise to God that she would be a mom to those who didn't have one. And you can tell with 13 kids, she obviously followed through on that promise. But it's amazing what we are able to do with that brokenness. But that's how the Bomberger family began. It wasn't, people ask what influenced my parents. I know they really mean, well, what possessed them? No. What inspired them? And that was because of my mom's own brokenness, that my mom and my dad, because you kind of have to be on the same plane there. If you're going to adopt 10 children, you have to kind of be in agreement. But that's why they chose to love those that the world said would be unwanted. And this is a beautiful thing. They shattered this myth. You hear all the time, well, that child should be born. Of course that child should be aborted because there shouldn't be an unwanted child in the world. That's Planned Parenthood's whole DNA. That's the foundation of Planned Parenthood. Every child a wanted child. First of all, your wantedness doesn't determine your intrinsic, irreplaceable worth or value. And there's no such thing as unwanted anyone. Everyone is wanted by someone, which my parents proved. They loved all of us. You hear, I love this mantra, pro-lifers don't care about children after they're born, which is a pretty ridiculous statement, but you probably have heard it. That would be like my parents adopting us and throwing us in a cage and saying, go fend for yourself. But no, they loved us, they fed us, they educated us, they provided all kinds of opportunities. Their love for us, not just for the adopted ones, but for their biologically related children, their love for all of us unleashed incredible purpose. That's what adoption does. It unleashes purpose. And so having grown up in that incredible experience with a really diverse family, as I mentioned, there are 15 of us, so some of us are white, some of us are black, some of us are biracial, Native American, Vietnamese, adopted as newborns, adopted out of the foster care system, adopted within the U.S., outside of the U.S. But it's amazing because we hear a lot in our culture today about diversity. Our family was definitely diverse. But the thing that tied us all together wasn't race, wasn't color, wasn't culture. It was love. And it's amazing what happens in those situations that are branded unplanned. When love is in that mix, it can radically transform everything. It transformed my life, it transformed my siblings' lives. Several of them came from horrifically abusive backgrounds. And love has the ability to change anything. Now here in this country, we have about 136,000 adoptions a year. That's just an estimate because there are no federal reporting mechanisms. It's just an estimate. There are 1.1 million abortions in our country every year. We have to do better. Human life is valuable regardless of the circumstances of conception. You can't control the shape of your earlobe. You can't control the shape of your big toe. I don't know what it looks like, but we can't control those things no more than we control the pigmentation of our skin, and we certainly can't control the circumstances of our conception. It doesn't change the value that we all possess. See, this is what happens. It's interesting because whenever anybody can say, you know what, you have X amount of worth, you have a different amount of worth, oh, you in the back, yeah, you have a different amount of worth. Look throughout history. Anytime any man, woman, or governmental institution gets to decide who has value and who doesn't, does that work out really well? Pretty much the natural follow-up to that. When any person or governmental institution determines human value, it's discrimination and death. That's what happens. But there's a beautiful part of the story because just like my birth mom, just like my adoptive parents, just like the people who run pregnancy care centers across this country, we have the ability to step in and be that love and that support to people who are experiencing a really scary moment, facing an unplanned pregnancy. By the way, I just want to say this, for those who have chosen abortion, and there may be some young women in here, there's nothing but love coming from me to you, because every situation can be redeemed. I believe that there's wholeness and healing. But I believe our role, especially as someone who's experienced what I've experienced as an adoptee, an adoptive father, that anything is possible. Someone standing before you who the world said should have been aborted is now able to create stories and create designs. I love design. Create content that shatters the myths of the abortion industry, that shatters the myth of the unwanted child. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself so you can kind of understand my perspective, where I'm coming from. And it's not to rattle off a bunch of things to say, hey, look at me, and to elevate myself. It's actually to highlight a God who enables triumph to rise from tragedy every single time. So Today, I'm an Emmy award-winning creative professional, a multiple award-winning broadcast media designer, a journalist, an author, a producer, all that stuff, and that's only a portion of it, but all that stuff is only possible because of a courageous birth mom who chose to be stronger than her circumstances. I want to leave you with this one truth. If you don't remember anything else that I've said, leave you with this one truth. Some of the best things in life are unpleasant.